You have to understand something about the rainforest at night before I tell you what happened. During the day, the Amazon is loud. It screams with insects, birds, frogs, branches snapping, water rushing. But at night, when something big decides to move, everything else goes quiet. I'm 37 years old. I spent most of my adult life mapping fault lines and sediment layers, studying how the Earth folds and fractures over millions of years. Rocks make sense to me. They don't stalk you. They don't change their mind. They don't breathe in the dark. That afternoon, I was following an exposed shale formation along a tributary off the Rio Negro. The rainy season had only just begun, and the air was so thick it felt chewable. Every breath tasted green, wet leaves, rot, mud, life decaying and being reborn. My boots sank into black soil with a sucking sound. Cicadas rattled so loudly they felt mechanical, like electricity running through the trees. I wasn't supposed to be alone that far upriver. My local guide, Paolo, had twisted his ankle 2 days earlier. I should have postponed the survey. Instead, I convinced myself I'd be fine for a short excursion. I had a GPS, a machete, a headlamp, a flare gun, basic first aid, and a satellite phone with a fickle connection. I'd done field work in the Andes and in the Australian outback. I trusted preparation. What I didn't account for was how quickly light disappears under a rainforest canopy. One moment the forest was dim and green. The next it was blue and dissolving. Clouds rolled in without warning, thick and swollen. The first drops of rain were warm and heavy, tapping leaves like slow applause. Within minutes, it was a wall of water. The river rose audibly, gulping at its banks. My GPS signal flickered. The screen froze. I remember standing there, rain sliding down my face, trying to tell myself to stay calm. I had marked camp only 5 kilometers back. 5 kilometers is nothing on open terrain. In the Amazon, it can take hours. I started back the way I thought I'd come, flagging trees with strips of orange tape as I moved. The rain intensified. The world shrank to 10 meters of visibility. The forest floor turned slick, roots coiling under mud like hidden traps. Twice, I slipped hard enough to bruise my hip. By the time I admitted I was disoriented, the sky was nearly black. Panic in the jungle is dangerous. It makes you rush. It makes you loud. I forced myself to stop moving. I found slightly higher ground near a buttress-rooted ceiba tree and decided to shelter there for the night. Traveling in darkness here is how people break legs, or worse. I set up a small tarp lean-to, more psychological comfort than real protection. The rain softened to a steady hiss. Mosquitoes found every inch of exposed skin. I lit a small chemical light and kept my headlamp off to preserve batteries. The forest began its nighttime shift. Frogs pulsed in rhythmic croaks. Something splashed in the river. Leaves rustled intermittently, small mammals moving through undergrowth. My breathing eventually slowed. I told myself this was inconvenient, not dangerous. Then the frogs stopped. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second there was sound. The next, a vacuum. I remember thinking, that's not normal. You can feel when you're being watched. I don't care how rational you are. Something primitive wakes up in your spine. The hair on my arms lifted. I reached slowly for my headlamp but didn't turn it on. Light can attract attention, and if something is hunting, it already knows where you are. The silence thickened. Even the insects seemed muted. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch. Not random movement. Wait, controlled. It came from behind me, somewhere beyond the reach of my dim chemical light. I strained to hear breathing over the blood pounding in my ears. The rain tapped gently on leaves above, masking subtle sounds. I cursed it silently. Another step. Closer. My mind ran through possibilities. Tapir, deer, maybe a feral dog. But tapirs blunder. Deer, bolt. This was measured. Confident. I swallowed and slowly stood up, making myself taller. I remembered what every wildlife briefing says about big cats. Don't run. Maintain eye contact. Make yourself look bigger. Jaguars are ambush predators. They prefer surprise, a bite to the skull or neck. My throat was dry as sand when I finally clicked on my headlamp. The beam cut a narrow white tunnel through dripping foliage. At first, I saw nothing but leaves shining wet and reflective. Then the light shifted slightly left. Two eyes burned back at me. Not green like in movies. Not glowing. Just intensely reflective. A pale gold mirror catching my beam. They were low to the ground and very still. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. The Jaguar stepped forward into partial light. It was larger than I expected, shoulders rolling under rosette-patterned fur slick with rain. Its head was massive, jaw broad and heavy. Water dripped from whiskers. It wasn't skinny. It wasn't desperate. It was powerful and calm. Territorial. That was my first coherent thought. I'd wandered into its range. I forced myself not to back up. My calves trembled anyway. "Hey," I said, my voice embarrassingly small in the open dark. "Easy." The Jaguar didn't flinch at my voice. It stared, unblinking. Its tail flicked once slow. I raised my arms outward, spreading my rain jacket to widen my silhouette. I took one deliberate step backward, not turning, not stumbling. The Jaguar responded instantly, taking a step forward to close the distance. That's when I understood something critical. It wasn't just passing through. It was assessing me. My mind flashed through every article I'd ever read. Jaguars rarely attack humans. Rarely is not never. The distance between us was maybe 12 meters. Too close. If it charged, it could cover that in seconds. I scanned for elevation. There was a low branch about 2 meters off the ground behind me. Climb? Jaguars can climb. Faster than me. Bad idea. I considered the flare gun strapped to my pack. Loud noise might scare it, or it might provoke it. The cat lowered its head slightly, shoulders bunching almost imperceptibly. That's the moment everything in me shifted from fear to survival calculation. I bent slowly, never breaking eye contact, and grabbed a fallen branch the thickness of my forearm. I lifted it overhead and shouted as loud as I could, a raw, wordless scream from somewhere deep in my chest. The sound tore my throat. The Jaguar hesitated. Not retreating, just recalibrating. It gave a low, guttural growl that vibrated in my ribs. You don't understand how physical that sound is until you hear it 10 meters away in total darkness. It's not just noise. It's pressure. I reached back blindly and felt for my pack, fingers shaking. I pulled the flare gun free and cocked it with clumsy urgency. The click echoed too loudly. The Jaguar's muscles tightened. It launched. There's no warning roar. No dramatic pause. 1 second it was crouched. The next it was airborne, a blur of muscle and wet fur. I fired without aiming. The flare exploded in white-red light between us with a deafening crack, spraying sparks. For a split second, the jungle turned daylight bright, shadows snapping into violent relief. The Jaguar veered midair, astonishing agility, but was already too committed. It collided with me anyway. The impact drove me backward into the mud. The branch flew from my hands. The flare hissed and sputtered to the ground beside us, casting chaotic light. I remember the smell first. Hot, animal musk and wet fur mixed with sulfur from the flare. Its weight crushed my chest. One massive paw slammed into my left shoulder, claws slicing through fabric and skin. The pain was immediate and electric. I jammed my forearm up instinctively as its jaws snapped toward my face. Teeth closed around my arm instead of my skull. The pressure was indescribable. Not a bite like a dog. It was a vice. I felt something in my forearm crack. White light exploded behind my eyes. I screamed and drove my knee upward blindly, connecting with its abdomen. It grunted, but didn't release. Mine ran warm down my wrist. I could feel its whiskers against my cheek. Its breath was hot and foul. I remembered something critical in that chaos. Protect your neck. Jaguars kill with a crushing bite to the skull or cervical spine. With my free hand, I grabbed the flare, still burning fiercely, and pressed it directly into the side of its face. The reaction was instantaneous. The cat shrieked, a high, furious sound, and released my arm. The smell of singed fur filled the air. It recoiled, swiping wildly. One claw raked across my thigh, slicing through muscle. I felt warmth flood my pant leg, but that moment of recoil was enough. I rolled sideways, scrambling through mud, slipping in my own blood. I got to my knees and grabbed the machete from my belt. The jaguar shook its head violently. One eye squeezed shut from the flare's burn. It looked smaller suddenly, but only because I was seeing it through adrenaline. It crouched again. I didn't wait. I grabbed the second flare cartridge from my kit with shaking fingers, loaded it, and fired directly at the ground between us. The explosion of light and sound was even more disorienting at close range. The jaguar snarled, backing 2 steps, clearly distressed by the fire and noise. I stood as tall as I could despite my legs screaming in pain and roared again, waving the machete overhead, advancing instead of retreating. Every instinct told me to run. Running would trigger pursuit. I forced myself forward. The jaguar held its ground for one endless second. Then it turned and vanished into the undergrowth as silently as it had appeared. Just like that, the forest did not immediately resume its sounds. It stayed silent, as if stunned. I stood there shaking, machete raised, waiting for a second charge that didn't come. When the flare burned out, darkness swallowed everything again. I collapsed. The pain arrived fully once the adrenaline began to ebb. My left forearm was mangled, puncture wounds deep and already swelling. My thigh bled steadily from 3 long gashes. My shoulder throbbed where claws had cut through. I knew enough first aid to understand the real danger now wasn't the jaguar. It was blood loss and infection. I crawled back under the tarp, hands slippery. I wrapped my thigh tightly with a compression bandage, teeth clenched as I pulled it tight enough to slow the bleeding. I cleaned my arm as best I could with treated water and antiseptic wipes, nearly passing out from the pain. Every few minutes I stopped and listened. Nothing. No returning footsteps. No growl. But sleep was impossible. I sat upright against the tree until dawn, machete in one hand, satellite phone in the other. I kept replaying the moment its jaws closed around my arm. The sound of bone cracking. The weight of it. The absolute certainty, for a fraction of a second, that I was about to die face down in mud no one would find for weeks. At first light, the forest seemed almost innocent. Birds resumed their calls. Mist rose from the ground. It felt surreal that hours earlier it had been a battlefield. I assessed my injuries in daylight. The bite had missed major arteries, miraculously. My arm was fractured but usable. My thigh wounds were deep but not catastrophic. I disinfected again and tightened bandages. Then I activated the satellite phone. It took 3 tries to connect. When Paolo's strained voice finally came through, I nearly cried. I gave coordinates, trying to keep my voice steady. It took rescue teams 6 hours to reach me by boat and foot. Those 6 hours were long enough for me to think about everything. I thought about how small I had felt under that animal's weight, how all my degrees and research and experience meant nothing in that instant. Out there, you're not an expert. You are meat. But I also thought about preparation. If I hadn't carried flares, if I hadn't remembered not to run, if I hadn't protected my neck instinctively, I wouldn't be here telling you this. The surgeons later told me the jaguar's bite force is among the strongest of any big cat. They were surprised my arm wasn't completely crushed. The burns on its face likely saved me. Fire is one of the few things wild predators instinctively avoid. I still dream about those eyes sometimes. Not evil. Not malicious. Just wild. People ask if I hate it. No. That jaguar was doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Defend territory, eliminate threats, survive. If anything, the night taught me something humbling and permanent. Nature is not cruel, but it is indifferent. The rainforest doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your confidence. Survival isn't about dominance. It's about awareness, preparation, and the ability to stay functional inside fear. When the forest goes silent, pay attention. And if you ever find yourself staring into gold eyes in the dark, remember this. Don't run. Stand your ground. Use what you have. Protect your neck. And never forget that out there, you are not at the top of the food chain. You are simply another living thing trying to see the morning.